Morning, everyone. My name is Karel Muchnick, and I actually graduated Baruch College in 2009, and I am an elder law attorney. Now, to get into what exactly is trust and estates and elder law, I'll just give you a quick, in a nutshell, and then my colleagues could jump in. Basically, trust and estates and elder law have a lot of different similarities, and usually attorneys that practice in one also dabble in the other, and vice versa. Trust and estates is basically transactional work, although there are attorneys that litigate, and there are lawsuits that are filed based on these issues. Trust and estates has to do with estate planning and estate administration. Estate planning is basically planning for how your assets are going to be distributed when you die. You get to have your last wishes reflected on pieces of paper that will be read before a surrogate court judge, and your assets will be distributed how you want it to be them distributed, and not pursuant to New York state law, which would be the case if you didn't have a will. Estate administration, on the other hand, is another side to the trust and estates practice, where you go to help families collect any assets that were left in the individual's name. And you help the families pay off any debts, file any tax returns. So there's a lot of business and finance. There's a lot of interesting things involved that, again, if you're a business major or even if you're a science major, there's a lot of interesting issues that you kind of are able to come across within your practice. Trusts are, of course, trust agreements. If any of you have heard of these, they're private agreements that are set up among family, either for tax savings purposes or for asset protection purposes. There are many different kinds of trusts, and we're not going to get into any of the different types, but that's trust and estates. What is elder law is something completely different. Most individuals don't know what elder law is. In fact, many attorneys don't know what elder law is. Elder law is essentially helping elder folks plan, either after retirement, or individuals who are thinking of retirement, planning for their end of life stages. So if individuals are on any public assistance, they can engage attorneys, to help them out, whether it's helping them file for supplemental security income, helping them file for Social Security disability, helping them file for Medicaid and protect their assets, helping them. Elder law attorneys also deal with capacity issues. So if mom or dad or grandma or grandpa is no longer capable of dealing with their own financial affairs, you would have to file what's called a legal guardianship, which is a proceeding in court, which I'm sure my colleague Anthony Lamberti will tell you about. He's the guardianship guru of New York, by the way, if for those of you who don't know. So there's a lot of different work when it comes to elder law, and many attorneys kind of specialize in their own separate field. Some handle Medicaid applications more than others. Some handle guardianships more than others. So that's basically trust and estates, elder law in a nutshell. And I will kick this back to you, Tina, and you could introduce.
Sure. Why don't we go with Anthony next, since you mentioned him, and then we'll move on to our other speakers. Anthony, you want to provide an introduction for yourself, please?
Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, first of all, I'm a proud CUNY graduate. I got my undergraduate degree in John Jay College a long, long time ago. And my background was in the New York State court system. I was a court officer, I was a court clerk, and I was a law secretary to a few different judges, but my last assignment put me in the Article 81 guardianship realm, where I was law clerk to Leonard Skolnick in Brooklyn. And that's how I really developed my experience in guardianship and in elder law.
Next, Pauline, can you provide us an introduction?
Sure. So I'm Pauline Young Ha, and I went to I graduated from Vassar College, which is a very small liberal arts college, but I did not intend to actually go into elder law. And when I graduated, I actually was an economics major. So I had no idea like what I really wanted to do. Then I said, I'm going to go to law school. So I took my LSAT and I went to St. John's Law School.
So, all right, now on to Brendan. Brendan, can you provide an introduction for yourself?
Yes, thank you, Tina. Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Bushman. The first thing I'll just say is that I think our students are very lucky to have the other panel members who, especially Pauline and Tony are giants in New York elder law. So I'm very pleased to be presenting with them. So I too am a CUNY grad. I graduated from Hunter in 2004.
So I guess one of the questions I had is, what's the likelihood of success in the legal field for those that did not follow a traditional law school track? You mentioned that you had a variety of different majors. So is it safe to say that you don't necessarily need to major in one particular thing? Or would you say it would be helpful if I had been a blank major? Who wants to take that on?
Okay. So obviously I'm living proof that you don't have to, you can be undecided and then make the ultimate decision later in life. In fact, I think by majoring in something that's non-traditional will give you a whole different perspective and a different skill set that will set you apart from many other law students. So between the jobs that I've had and the studies, I was able to bring to the table, even to the interview table, as you've heard Pauline mention, how I was able to set myself apart from other attorneys who were interviewing at the same firm is by getting into that I majored in finance and investments, by getting into that I worked at a sales desk at an investment company and that I was able to make deals over the phone with clients. I was able to win individuals' trust over that haven't even seen my face. So just a lot of different soft skills, business technical background, especially if you're an engineer or a science major, there's intellectual property law. I mean, there's the opportunities are just endless, and the sky is definitely not the limit when it comes to the legal practice. So I would say that if you are interested, regardless of whether you're a pre-law major or you're majoring in art history and have no idea, if you believe that this is for you, then I would say that maybe start with an internship or start doing your own research and see what's out there. Maybe meet other attorneys, have conversations, and let that take you, to the next step.
Anyone have anything else to add?
Well, I just like to say that from the law school application process, law schools are looking for a very diverse and major student body. And I think if you have different things that you've majored in, a traditional pre-law background that a lot of people say, oh, they know they're going to law school right away. I wouldn't necessarily point that as the best direction. Schools in the admission process are looking for people with a lot of different backgrounds. Brendan was a school teacher. I was a court officer when I applied to law school. Pauline maybe went a little more traditional. She applied soon after college. So don't feel if I'm majoring in this, it's going to be impossible or difficult to get into law school, because that's not the case. And as strange as it sounds, particularly now that I'm in this practice area, and Brendan alluded to it, the vast amount of people that you interact with as an elder lawyer and a trust and estates lawyer, it touches on every conceivable field. I was involved in a matter recently, and the prospective client was an art gallery owner and art dealer. Now, I know nothing about art or art galleries or anything like that, but the point I'm making is that notwithstanding what your background is, undergraduate, and even in law school, you will interact with so many people, and even if you have a small basis of knowledge in one thing, it could be very helpful to you down the road. I just want to make one other thing, and it's somewhat of a funny story from law school. I had a law school colleague, classmate of mine. We affectionately called him Mr. Taxes, because he was an accountant, and all he wanted to do, other than the basic classes, was to take classes in tax. And we found out soon after the bar exam results were out that he didn't pass the bar exam. And even though he was a very intelligent guy, he so honed in on one particular area in law school, he didn't have a diverse enough background to pass the bar exam. And that's the other part of law school that you really don't understand until you get there. And especially now, and I'm not that attuned to what the law school admission or post admission to the bar testing is like, because I haven't looked at it in a while. But in law school, you need to have a very broad, diversified background in law courses. They endeavor to do that with the basic courses that you're required to take. But if you hone in on one particular area and say, oh, I want to be a tax expert, that may be great, and it may bode well for you in the future. But the obstacle of being admitted to the bar and taking the admission exam is daunting, and you need to have a broad-based legal education to have a fighting chance to pass the bar, and not be overwhelmed with that whole process. So I think that's really the crux of it. And the other part of it is being an elder lawyer is not glamorous. People get interested or turned on to the law because they see TV shows, or they've read books about interesting legal things, and they say to themselves, "Oh, this sounds really glamorous, and this must be a really great field to be in." You come across cases that you might see on TV or read a book about, maybe if you're lucky, once or twice in your legal career. And really what you're dealing with every day, as Brendan alluded to, is nuts and bolts things that we've become expert in. But the real important part of it is we're dealing with people, we're dealing with families, and primarily a lot of what we do is we're dealing with people and families in crisis and in desperate need of guidance and help and services and a lot of things. So, we're the intersection of law, psychology, sociology, public benefits, the list goes on. And that's the part of this that I can't stress enough is it's not glamorous, but it's rewarding.
Excellent. So what about lucrative?
All right. Well,
Who wants to take that on?
I'm going to say lucrative is a relative term. And, we as elder lawyers, and I view it myself in this manner, we're transactional attorneys. Every new client, we have the client usually for a short period of time. They meet with us, we get retained, we undertake the work that needs to be done, and we get them their benefits, whatever we're doing for them, and the case is over, and it could be over in a few months. And we're constantly, as Karel mentioned, we're constantly seeking new business and marketing and different things like that. Pauline alluded to it a little bit, that it's recession proof. And these past events of the past few months are going to test that recession proof theory that we all seem to have. I'm in that group that I think it is recession proof, particularly now with more and more people are seeing, their mortality and viewing their mortality because of something that can happen that they have no control over. In addition to all of that, in the Medicaid planning field, we have new rules going into effect. In the middle of all this, the governor's budget bill that was passed by the legislature is changing the Medicaid home care rules, which we're all navigating through, and it's going to be going to effect October 1st. So there will be a tremendous need for our services, I think, post reopening on a lot of different fronts, so lucrative. I'll say that I'm very happily ensconced in my New Jersey Shore beach house right now, where I have been for the last 10 weeks, and it is quite lucrative, but you earn money, you work hard, and that's always been my philosophy. And so it's lucrative financially, and it's lucrative on I think on a personal, interactive client level as well.
Ina, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
There's been a lot of emphasis on, how this is, sort of a recession-proof area, and it's not glamorous. But in fact, there are a lot of really interesting issues in elder law, things like guardianship. I mean, there's so many sort of challenging issues that you probably have handled, and I wonder if it makes sense to maybe dig into that a little bit, sort of some of the interesting issues that you've seen or challenges. Knowing that it's lucrative is good, but I know that our students also love a challenge, and I think it'd be great to hear some of that.
Well, when I say it's not glamorous, I say that in the vein of very few of these cases get public notoriety. They're not in the newspaper. There's no TV shows about them. Occasionally, a case gets reported in the Law Journal or something along those lines. Now, the issues are widespread. I in my years of doing guardianship in private practice, and even when I worked for the judge always used to joke about this. He says, we should write a book about all of the different interesting things that have come along. And in private moments with him, I said, you're saying we should write a book. That means, Tony, you should write the book. But the biggest thing that I've always focused on or enjoyed the most have been the economic exploitation cases. And I say that in guardianship, to me, those are the most interesting, most juicy. I mean, it could be a family member exploiting an elderly person. It could be the neighbor. It could be a friend. It could be another professional, an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor. So I find those to be, at least for me in guardianship, those have been the most interesting cases. You know, there's a lot of cases about healthcare decision making and you know, the right to die that have come up over the years. You know, in New York, we're involved. When I say we're, the elder law section is involved with trying to get a bill passed, the right to die bill passed in the state legislature. So these, and I was going to allude to this. I know we had sent around some of these questions earlier on, but that's one of the things that I think is the most rewarding of being an elder lawyer and being involved in bar association groups. Because not only do we get to work on cases about our clients, we're also involved in trying to set policy for what's going to be going on in our state through the bar association. I think conservatively in the elder law section, we must have 25 subcommittees that do substantive work and recommendations, legislative, Medicaid. We have a right to die committee. We have a guardianship committee. We have multiple committees, and the committees are very active, monitoring legislation and in many instances, proposing legislation. I know in the guardianship committee, we've worked on an order of protection bill in the context of a guardianship case. It's still in its drafting stages of trying to work out some kinks and coordinating with other statutes, but these are the types of things that we regularly do, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to do that if you're so inclined. And quite frankly, I think it's probably been the most beneficial thing I've done as an attorney is be involved in all the bar groups that I've been involved with over the years, because you get to have the proverbial seat at the table to deal with a lot of cutting edge issues in elder law. And
Tony, mind if I jump in on the lucrative question as well?
Sure.
Please do.
All right, and I think I can also address, there was a question on the chat about the process to become a partner, and I think I can talk about that with being lucrative.
Thank you.
So, as Tony talked about, as elder law attorneys and T&E attorneys, it is a lucrative area. It's a lucrative area differently, though, than traditional litigation or more of a corporate area, right? So I'm trying to think of sort of pop culture references that people might be familiar with, right? If you're thinking about making money through traditional litigation, you can think about Erin Brockovich, right? Being doing tort work or personal injury work where you working on a contingent basis, and if you win a big settlement amount or you win a big number from your, in the litigation, your fee is substantial, right? Most T&E and elder law attorneys, we don't work like that, okay? Even if we do litigation and guardianship is litigation, we're taking a retainer, we're not doing it on a contingent basis. So we're more of higher volume practice, meaning that we have more clients and you can make a good amount of money, but you have to have more clients to make more money, right? Whereas some attorneys can have fewer clients and just make a lot of money from those small number of clients. You know, I work at a firm where we do almost everything. We do real estate, we do litigation, we do T&E, we do elder law. We like to joke that we keep the lights, you know, we keep the electricity bill paid, we keep the lights running, we keep everything going, and that while the litigation attorneys take bigger risks and go through drought periods, and then sometimes hit a home run, and then we go through a feast period, right? The T&E and elder law attorneys, we're more just the steady. We keep things from the finances of the firm. We keep things going. Becoming a partner at a law firm, to answer that question that was asked, I think there's two ways to answer it. If you're at a firm that is not an American 100 firm, I mean, how do you become a partner? I think, how much money are you bringing to the firm, right? That's how you become a partner. You become a partner by bringing in money to the firm. If you are going a different route, if you're going to a big law firm right out of law school, or you're getting into a big law firm, they have a much more defined process and step. I've never worked at one of those. I know people that do, so I'm not going to speak to that from personal experience. But if you're working at one of those firms, you know, you're going to be called a first-year associate, a second-year associate, a third-year associate, et cetera, until you become a partner, if you become a partner, right? Becoming a partner at those firms is extremely difficult. So I look at it from my perspective that becoming a partner where I work is about how much business am I originating? And how am I doing that? I'm doing that by marketing. I speak at events, and I hang out with accountants. I hang out with financial advisors. I ask them to refer, if you know, I know somebody at Wells Fargo, if your client needs a will, you want to refer them to me, right? I also do that by doing good work for my clients, right? That's the best way to get new business, is to work well for the clients you have, and word of mouth referrals are still the best way to get new business, okay? The way, that's just how it still is, okay? You can get a referral from your financial guy at Wells Fargo or anywhere else, but ultimately it's like a blind date, okay? If you get a referral from someone who used me for the services that you now need, and this person says that I did a good job, the odds are you're going to hire me. It's just, that's the best way to get business. So the best way, again, to get business is to do a good job for the people that you have. And then over time, they'll refer other people to you.
And I also have a comment on the lucrative portion. So when you're thinking about elder law firm, right, there are actually not that many big-sized elder law firm out there. Most of the elder law firms are actually small, like somewhere between either a solo firm to up to like 3 to 4 attorneys. And if you consider big, a size of 20 is considered very big in an elder law firm. So in terms of lucrative, as Brendan mentioned, you do have to bring in business. You have to drum in the business. And Tony also said that, you know, because what we're working in this kind of field, clients do pass away. Clients, when we do the long-term care planning, it's a one-time transaction. So we always need to have new business coming in. In addition, what I would say, like, what is comfortable to you is what I call lucrative, you know? So does it make you comfortable living in a one-family home versus in a fancy condo? You know, like, there's many different ways of how we define it. But I've been saying all this time, I'm very comfortable with what I'm doing, and I like the fact that every time I'm doing service for a client, they're very appreciative. That's the key for why I'm still in this field for so long. But there's one thing I do want to mention is that really that we haven't tapped into, or is the minority groups. Elder law is very underserved in the minority community. I actually am able to tap into that community because I have a specific actually speak two different languages. In addition to English, of course, I can speak Mandarin and I also can speak Cantonese. So these two languages can capture like the bulk of the Chinese community in the 5 boroughs. I'm thinking that if you have a different language skill like Spanish, or you can speak Italian, or you can speak any type of other languages, there's so many different populations you can serve.
Or Russian.
Yes,
Yeah, I was
definitely.
gonna say.
Because anywhere you find this group of community, they need your help, and they don't know how to find you most of the time. So I do a lot of marketing. I have to find the niche where most of the enclaves, where they are. So for example, the Chinese community, I would go to Sunset Park in Brooklyn. I would meet the community leaders there. I would go to Flushing. I would meet up with all the accountants or the financial advisors there. And so it depends on where I would always say, use your skill set, know what you're good at. If you like to meet people, the elder law field, actually, you're going to be meeting people every day. So it's very different from like a business firm or where you're just doing solely business transactions. You probably would never see your client in a big company, but elder law, you're seeing everyone. And in addition, when you're helping someone, it's all about hand-holding them and knowing how to alleviate any type of crisis that can come in. I can remember my first case being a client who came in. She didn't know how to find me. And so when I made that one connection with a health insurance company in Chinatown, she referred me over and she said, why don't you look for Pauline? So she did. She came in and she said, I didn't know, she said, my husband is in a nursing home right now. He's 101 years old and I've been privately paying for him for the last 3 years. At that time, private pay wasn't that expensive. I mean, for her at that time was very expensive. And that was 10, 20 years ago. We're talking about $200 a day. Now we're talking about $500 a day at the minimum. And so back then, $200 a day, she has a condominium and she has about $200,000. And she also had a IRA, but all of that money, she was in her 80s. She doesn't have that much if you really consider, because she also has a son who's disabled. So there's a lot of different factors we have to consider when we're planning. So the husband is in a nursing home. She's 80 years old with a 60-year-old son who's disabled. So what kind of planning can we do for her? So that's first case. We utilize something called a Medicaid planning tool called spousal refusal, where we're able to use to transfer the property over to her name and all the cash to her name, and utilize the special rule called spousal refusal, so she can keep her husband's money. Then her husband would be paid for by the government using Medicaid benefits. So then we do her planning and help her set up a special needs trust for her son who's disabled. After this first case, when it was successful, she then referred a second case to me. The second case was not about a nursing home now. It's about someone who's an 80-year-old who needs home care. He needs round-the-clock home care, while the wife, who's 60, she needs health insurance, so she was working at a health insurance company, and so she cannot take care of her husband. So you can see, like, these cases kind of stem, like I got one and then another, and then it snowballs. So whether or not you say it's lucrative, yes, it is. But at the same time, because these cases, a lot of elder law firms are solo, they're smaller size, I can say you can control your cases. You don't have to take a lot in. If you say, I only want to take 10 or 15 this month, I can't go more than that. You can control how comfortable you want to live. So that's how I want to explain what the lucrative is.
Thank you, Pauline. And on the very important topic of diversity, which has been a theme in our Pre-Law Institute this week, I was wondering if Karel had anything to add to that.
Sure. So this goes back to how you set yourself apart. from other applicants to law school or from other attorneys interviewing for work. So in my case, I happen to speak Russian fluently. I was born in Ukraine. I came here when I was 8 years old, and the English language used to be old noise. For someone like myself, this is maybe why I never imagined going to law school. I had a different vision of what someone should look or sound like who goes to law school, until I started meeting other students, who maybe went to Baruch or other CUNY schools that went to law school that were, bilingual or multilingual and did not look like, the typical student that I myself imagined, going to law school. No one in my family ever went to law school. I come from a family, everyone is an engineer or has some engineering background. So it just never was a thought in my mind until I started, taking courses and learning more about the field and doing well in where it all clicked. And I figured, what, I could be good at this. So I gave it a shot, and I definitely took the path. When applying for law school, apart from your law school application, your letters of recommendation, the LSAT score, your undergraduate transcript, law schools also want to see, well, it's not mandatory, but they allow you to submit a diversity statement, which is basically your story. You're communicating to the law school what sets you apart from other law students and how you can contribute to the legal community based on your background, based on, speaking a foreign language, based on any other things that typical law students don't bring into law school, which is certainly what I took advantage of. I told the whole story, how we came to this country, how my grandfather was held back by the former Soviet Union because he had very high clearance as a radio engineer back in Russia when the Soviet Union, Ukraine used to be a part of Russia until the Soviet Union fell apart. So they weren't letting him go, and they were holding us back from leaving the country until my mother got other attorneys involved, got other civil rights activists groups involved, that finally they allowed my grandfather to leave, and we were able to leave the country. So that was, I guess, my first initial run-in with the law, really, and how it helped save us and start us on this new path. So being diverse is a very big advantage in this field, because I mentioned I had my first internship for a criminal defense attorney, and the guy was bilingual in Spanish. And if you ask him the question, whether his practice is lucrative, he'll probably have the biggest smirk on his face because, he services Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, and the entire Spanish-speaking community don't want to deal with anyone else but him. Even though, they speak in English, they want to deal with someone they can relate to. So it certainly helps working at a small firm because you're able to drum up all of that business and set yourself apart from all these other practices and all these big other law firms who essentially, a lot of times big law firms try to solicit the small guy because they see how much value that individual could bring. I know plenty of attorneys who were their own solo practitioners who thought sometimes it would be a good idea to join a big law firm, to cut overhead costs, until they realized that the big house law firm was actually getting more out of the deal than they were. And they went back and opened up a small shop again and continued about it that way because it made the best possible sense for them. So I think, the takeaway from all of this is like Brendan said, and Pauline and Anthony, you get what you give. You put in a lot of hard work. If you're a people person, you like working with people, you have people skills, you're interested in the field. You like hard work, you like challenges. The elder law field is constantly evolving. I don't know if you guys caught it, but Pauline, before we began, mentioned something about the law changing with respect to home care, which in the state of New York, if your grandpa, grandma, or if you have older parents needed a home health aide to come to the house to help them with certain daily living tasks before, until October of this year, which we're still going to find out exactly how the law is affecting our current clients, you were able to easily apply for Medicaid. If you had too many assets, you can transfer them out of your name and you could make the application because there was no issues. Now, New York State is trying to make it very tough for people to apply for Medicaid, because really Medicaid is meant to impoverish you. It's really meant for people who don't have much to their name. But that said, Medicaid is really for everyone. We've helped individuals, as you heard Pauline mentioned, we've helped individuals who have millions in their name save assets and still apply and become eligible for Medicaid. Because at the end of the day, everyone worked tremendously hard for all of their wealth that they had accumulated throughout their lifetimes. No one is trying to lose it to healthcare costs, because then there'll be nothing to leave to the next generation. So this is why Medicaid planning is so important. And for those who still are not completely understanding what it is, Medicaid planning is really asset protection planning. So if you own a piece of real estate, you have bank accounts, you have all these other assets, if you become sick and you develop a chronic illness, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and you end up in a skilled nursing care facility, you have two choices. Either you're going to be paying private, which could be up to $15,000 per month, or you're applying for Medicaid. So you could imagine if you spend a couple of years in a skilled nursing care facility, that could wipe out your life savings rather quickly. So that's basically my 2 cents on making sense.
Thank you. If we can, I'd like to get to some student questions, and Letitia had a question or a couple of questions. Letitia, do you want to unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. I'm a little different because I've already gone to law school. I'm currently working on passing the bar exam now, but I'm interested in the field, but I really have very little experience in this field. I've worked in benefits administration for a private company for about 20 years. So I've worked with retirement plans, health plans, and things like that. But how would someone like me break into a field that I have very little experience in?
Okay, so how do you break into this field if you have very little or no experience?
Well, I think, Letitia, what you have to embellish and try to distinguish yourself with is your knowledge about a lot of these healthcare benefit plans. Mm-hmm. Every firm. I mean, I'm a relatively small firm, and there are things that I don't do, and people contact us about coverage issues and things like that, and those are things that we don't do. Some other firm may do that. Now, there may be firms out there that have the need for someone like you with knowledge of health insurance and health benefit plans. So you have to try to, in applying or working on your resume, mm-hmm. develop that and play that, make that the prominent part of your background. And because quite frankly, you mentioned you have no experience, but you do have experience. You just have to package it in a way to make it appear attractive to a prospective employer and interviewer.
And just to add to that, you can join bar sections, you can get involved in events, you can meet other attorneys. So that certainly helps, because if there ever is an opening, yes, usually attorneys are looking for folks with experience, but sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes they're so busy that they're willing to take on anyone and train them. So it would really depend on, how heavy-handed the practice is, and just really on the situation itself. Certainly, if you have no experience, you can start taking CLEs, which are continuing legal education courses in either elder law or trust and estates. Just simply being a sponge and taking in as much as you possibly can will definitely help you, in the short and in the long run, with respect to getting the interview and the job. So definitely it's, opportunities are different for everyone. I mean, you could have a family friend, some people are lucky. Their parents are attorneys or they have someone in the family who's an attorney and they connect them with the right people. Sometimes you're not so lucky and you really have to lift every rock to find your opportunity.
That's
You know,
me.
it really, the best answer is the best cliche lawyer answer is it depends. It depends on what you do with your opportunities.
Can I try to address a couple of the things that were raised in the chats?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, there were a couple of things raised about economic exploitation. One of them is, anyone can be a victim. And the answer to that is that's true. Anyone can be a victim of economic exploitation. But, in our little world, in elder law, we're only dealing with elderly people who may have been economically exploited. Some of it, quite frankly, is criminal, the things that go on. And DA's offices in the city have maybe been a little slow in assessing this as an area for criminal prosecution. They have done some. They've started with some recently, when I say recently, within the last 10 years or so, having elder crimes bureaus that they never had before. Another question that was raised in the chat, do you get emotionally traumatized or emotionally invested in some of these economic exploitation situations? And at the heart of it is, in law school, part of our training is you're not advised to get emotionally invested in your client's case. You have to try to get the information from them, put it into something that is actionable, and to make your case. But the other side of the coin, that's what they tell you in law school. When you get out there and you're handling these cases, and in some of these cases that I've been involved in guardianship and economic exploitation cases, I'm the only thing standing between a scoundrel getting away with a lot of money from an elderly person and them potentially being penniless. So on an emotional level, I get very angry sometimes in handling these cases. And some of these people are, quite frankly, are scoundrels. And, there's no other way to describe it. And so you do get that, that ire or that anger up a little bit sometimes. And, Pauline, we do some Pauline has done some guardianship cases and she's been involved in some. And obviously she was with us when I was with Judge Stolnick. I mean, I handled the case in private practice after I left Judge Stolnick. The son was ripping off mom. It was bad enough that he was doing it. We caught him. We got the money put back into the guardianship. And soon after, when he realized how expensive the cost of the nursing home was, she had a lot of health problems. One of her problems was she couldn't swallow and digest and things like that. She had a feeding tube. He decided to go to the nursing home, and under the guise of bringing her dinner or doing whatever, he would bring her things that could potentially choke her. And, choking her in her condition would have killed her. So these kinds of things, when you're involved in these cases, particularly on the occasion that I'm appointed guardian for someone, I'm that person. I step into their shoes. I'm trying to protect their rights and interests in their life, basically. And, it does get emotional sometimes. and sometimes you have to take a step back and detach yourself emotionally, but it's difficult. The other thing that I just wanted to mention about that came up in the chat was, work-life balance with being in a firm or being in a solo practice or whatever. When you're a solo practitioner, you can come and go as you please. You don't really have to answer to anybody. And early in my career, when I left working with the court, I was a solo practitioner, and my children were younger and in grammar school and middle school, and I was able to leave the office and go to the school play or go to different school events, open school night or afternoon, meet with the teachers and different things like that, because I had the flexibility of my own schedule. When you're with a firm, you're answering to other people. And every firm operates differently. And I'm not speaking for any particular firm, but I know of firms that are very accommodating to their staffs with things like this, with regard to family situations. Even now, as I find myself, I am a potential client of an elder law firm myself. Now that I am over 60, I still have a 95-year-old mother who lives in Bay Ridge, and so dealing with your staff or your employees having issues with their relatives because of medical concerns or illness or what have you. These are all things that you have to, as an employer or even as an employee. Staff members have come to me with these kinds of problems, and I try to be as accommodating as I can, because I view it as our kind of office is almost like a family. We're dealing with a lot of families, and we have to show a certain level of compassion and caring in handling things for the clients. And in my view of it is, how would that look when I'm not showing that same kind of compassion or caring with my own employees? That could somehow reflect poorly on me. It may not, the employee may not come out and say it, but sometimes it can be, the body language or the non-communicative word sometimes can convey employee distress or uneasiness, and I don't want my client, my employees to feel that I don't care about them and I don't care about what's going on with their families. And I've had situations where people have had childcare issues, and they've had family illness and different things going on, and we've tried to be as accommodating as we could in dealing with that. So, to use Carell's lawyerly answer, it depends, but I find that in the smaller setting, it's a lot more workable to accommodate or deal with that work-life balance than maybe in a bigger law practice.
Can I jump in here a second?
Tina, you're on mute, by the way.
My apologies. Absolutely, feel free to chime in, Brendan.
Oh, okay. All right. I was just going to jump in on a couple things that were talked about. I'll first start, though, with one of the questions from the chat. Do I have law school debt? Yes, I do. Yes, I still do. I as I alluded to before, I borrowed all of the money to pay for law school. I went to Brooklyn Law School, and it's about $50,000 a year, right? So that's $150,000 that I had I didn't have to borrow all of it though, because about 50% of it I got through grant money, and primarily based on my LSAT score. Right, I was talking about that before. It's a huge factor in how much money they're going to give you. To go back to diversity and to kind of continue what Tony was just talking about, we're dealing with middle class. A lot of us who are dealing with elder law, doing elder law, we're dealing with middle to lower middle class people. And, one of the things that's, I think, most important is that they come in all shapes and sizes. And you have to be prepared for people to say, I'm sure everyone else, all the other panelists have seen it, let me put it this way to the college, to the students attending. If you have an uncle or a grandmother who, embarrasses you by saying inappropriate things, right? They're usually my client, okay? Or Kirill's client, or Tony's client, or Pauline's client, right? These people are not gonna be PC necessarily, okay? And you have to, they're your client, and I have a client who's a 92-year-old Italian man. If a woman doctor comes to see him, he thinks it's a nurse. That's not gonna change, right? He's former FDNY, he is what he is at this point, right? So you just have to take them as they, you take your clients as they come. I think what's really most important is that, as I said before, I used to teach. One of the things I used to teach was rhetoric, right? And how do you speak to people, and how do you convince people of something? How do you persuade them? And I think that, to talk about something current, if I were teaching, I would be showing Governor Cuomo's briefings from time to time, and not talking about the content. I'm not trying to talk political. I'm trying to talk about the skills that he uses to gain people's trust. Number one, he's honest. Number two, he's forthright, right? Number three, he shows empathy. Those are the three things that are most important, right? Be honest with your clients. Be honest with potential employers. Number two, show that you have empathy for them. If you're on a job interview and you don't have the training, say it. And say it that you're willing to learn, right? I was fortunate in that I was hired to do elder law I had T&E experience. I didn't have much elder law. I was working at a solo practitioner like Tony was talking about. And I talked about my willingness to learn, and that was helpful. And I did get that job. I think I'm different from the other attorneys on this, in that my firm is a little bit bigger. We have about 50 attorneys, which is considered, in the New York area, we're considered a mid-sized firm, but a small mid-sized firm. What's different from what I do, from where I work versus where I used to work as a solo, where it was 2 attorneys and an assistant. When you're working for a small firm, you're not just a lawyer. You're a paralegal. You're a secretary, you're a tech support, right? If the copy machine goes down, you're standing there trying to fix the copy machine for 2 hours until it gets fixed, right? And you're not billing anybody for it, and you're not making any money on that time, but you need it because you need to work. You need it in order to get your work done, right? When you're at a mid-sized firm or a larger firm, when the copy machine goes down, I call the copier guy, right? Or I call this person, right? It's a different thing, right? Things are more delegated, right? We have people to address things. When I need marketing materials at a small firm, I had to make my own. I had to go online. I had to design my own marketing materials. I had to pretend I was a graphic designer. I don't know anything about graphic design. I had to figure that out on my own. At a mid-sized firm, a larger firm, they have those produced for me. We just plug in my name and my info, boom, take it, go. Okay, so there are some things that you have to be more of a do-it-yourselfer at a smaller firm. I like where I am, but at the same time, if I went to a bigger firm, like Tony was talking about, depending, would I be sacrificing work-life balance? Odds are yes. Odds are yes. The more partners and the more attorneys that you have, the more people you have to be beholden to. And that's just, That's a cost. We call that a cost benefit analysis. What do you want? What are you willing to give up in order to get it?
Those are great points, Brendan. Someone had in the chat, and I wanted to address this because it's a great point. Any additional criteria needed to be an elder lawyer, or should we say a certified elder lawyer? And Pauline, do you want to talk about that?
I don't have any certification. So there is a national certification out there called NALA. And although I'm not a CELA, they call it, that's the actual certification, I'm on their New York chapter NALA board. So you don't have to be. But a lot of times it's really about your experience and, you know, how you work with clients before, and you bring in all your different disciplinary practice, like all you had, you know, and be able to work in this field of law. So there is no certification needed at all. But I would, you know, I would encourage you before, you know, if you're interested in becoming an elder law attorney, not to start off immediately after law school and become a solo. You should always start with a firm, because there's so many different areas of, you know, the law. Like you have guardianship, you have estate planning, you have the advance directives, you have, you know, the irrevocable trust, and all so many different areas that it could go wrong, and you don't want to go wrong because that's your client's retirement funds. You know, these are things that are so serious, are so dear to them, and you want to help and protect that. So if you can, I would say without the certification, definitely, as Kirill also mentioned earlier, bar associations, do some voluntary work. I'm very sure that, you know, there are pro bono clinics or projects out there that you can probably pick up some of those cases from attorneys that I believe, yes, it is still available. It is still a requirement today that if you are a law school student, before you can get your admission to the bar, you have to show a 50-hour pro bono clinic, 50-hour pro bono hours that you serve. And so that is one of the criteria before you can become an attorney. So these are things that you can also get a head start. You don't have to wait until then, but it will be a requirement when you are in law school before you get admitted to the bar.
Excellent.
Can I just mention that in general terms, in New York, we don't have certification for any practice area, whereas New Jersey does. And they have different areas. I'm not admitted in New Jersey, I just happen to know this. So it really depends. It's a state by state criteria with regard to the certification process. As Pauline alluded to, in New York, we're not required to be certified. Many of us who were involved in elder law in New York are also involved in NALA, which is the National Academy of Elder Lawyers, and you know we regularly attend meetings, and we do a lot of advocacy with NALA that we can't do with the New York State Bar Association because of our rules. So NALA is an important advocacy arm for us elder lawyers. Now, in terms of pro bono things, I do know right now the New York State Bar has they're soliciting for pro bono work for small estates because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The State Bar has a pro bono outreach going on now for attorneys, and I'm sure there'll be attorneys who are going to be signing up for this. I know the Brooklyn Bar, we've created our Trust and Estates Committee is doing something also with this pro bono project to try to get involved and help people with small estates because of the pandemic. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And the last thing I want to allude to is, if you're a law student, I know the State Bar does. We have in elder law, we have a law school subcommittee. and we regularly have delegates from the different law schools who sit on the executive committee in elder law. And it gives them an opportunity, I think, to see how we function, what we do. And it also could give you the opportunity to get involved in a substantive committee, maybe even before admission. And it would give you a tremendous opportunity to meet a lot of elder lawyers. I mean, geographically, you're all in the New York City area, I'm presuming, because of Hunter and Baruch. Our annual meeting of the State Bar Association, hopefully we can hold it next January, but it's at the Hilton Hotel. It's usually the last week of January. Every committee, every section of the State Bar meets that week. There's CLE opportunities, there's networking opportunities. So there's a lot of opportunities to be out there, meet lawyers, find out what they do. And, I think any of us would be helpful to try to help you in that endeavor. I'm sure Carell will distribute our emails or whatever, and feel free to email me, and I'll try to respond to you and give you some ideas and hopefully I'll be able to help you in some manner.
So one thing all the speakers touched on is their involvement in bar associations, in civic organizations, and the importance of networking. And I just wanted to emphasize that once again for our viewers, how important all of that is in business development and in your own professional development. So thank you very much. It looks like I have a question from Samantha. So Samantha, if you're on and you can unmute yourself, would you like to ask your question? If not, I could read it. Samantha? Okay, I'll ask her question. She wants to know, what were some of your experiences in your first year of law school that you remember struggling with, and how did you go about dealing with some of those struggles?
Can I jump on that?
Of course.
Okay. So first year of law school is absolute hell, but it's the good kind, because it will definitely open the doors to everything else in life. When they told me before law school, get ready to work hard, that law school really plays on your emotions, I never imagined what that meant until I got to law school. So number one, when you're in college and you're an undergrad and you have students sitting along your side and everyone is majoring in different things, and maybe some students are more motivated than others, it's much easier for you to stand out in class and do well, and get your 4.0 GPA. In law school, it's a very different game, because only so many A's can be given. Some people are receiving assistance, financial assistance from the law school, and they have to keep a certain GPA, which makes law school very, very cutthroat. Depending on what students you have in your section, or how you're able to manage under pressure, it is very, very tough. When I went in with everyone else, the first 3 weeks, everybody is high on life. They're so happy, everyone thinks they're going to be an attorney in no time. I would say in about the 4th week, it finally sinks in, and people don't look so happy, and they look more scared than anything after they realize how much material was covered in the past month, and how when the final comes, that final exam decides the entire grade. There's no real midterms. There's no projects. If you have a bad day, or if you fail the final, you fail the class. And just to go back to law school debt, if you took out loans, you still have to pay back those student loans. When my class, we started with 240 people first year, 20 people failed out first year. I'm sure they worked just as hard, maybe some not so much, but you have to be ready to work. And you have to be ready to deal with certain emotions. At a certain point, everyone has their own meltdown or whatever you want to call it, people start to feel like it's only happening to me. You start to have your own self-doubts. You start feeling sometimes like maybe this is not for you, because it does get that difficult. And the sooner you realize that everyone is going through what you're going through, the easier this journey is going to be. And with that said, definitely don't let student loan debt be the deciding factor, whether you go to law school or not. Yes, it is a major factor. And in fact, when I was headed to law school, every attorney I spoke to said it's a bad idea. Don't do it. But for me, I wanted to go so much, and it became a dream. I didn't have it when I was younger, but suddenly I just told myself that this is what I have to do. I want to make my family proud. I want to make myself proud. I know the work is interesting. I know that at the end of the day, whether I'm taking, $200,000 of loans out, which I had to do, because, I had to also live in Albany aside from go to school. And I wasn't going to work my first year because I knew how busy I was going to be. So at the end of the day, you're making a large investment in yourself. There are people that take out hundreds of thousands and invest in failing businesses every day. You are making an investment in yourself. And if you believe in yourself, then you will get there, because there's no other, failure is not an option. So you have to be determined. You have to know that this is for you, because, this financial aid that law schools aren't just handing it out. And you might not be able to get the LSAT score that you wanted. But you know what? It's not a big deal. You go to law school and then you work hard and you figure it out. That's it.
Excellent
I,
advice.
I went to law school at night. I was a full-time employee of the court system. So for me, the toughest part of going to law school was time management. I worked every day from 9 to 5, and classes started at 6. I got home most nights between 9 and 10 o'clock at night. I bleary-eyed tried to maybe read some cases and prepare for the next day. I spent a lot of time on the weekends preparing and doing things, and you don't have a lot of if you go to law school at night, you're probably not going to have as vigorous a social life as you may have thought you would have, or maybe you had when you were an undergraduate. But the time management skills that I had to develop quickly was probably the biggest difficulty I had in the first year.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Pauline, did you want to add something?
Sure. I just want to comment that when I was in my first year of law school, compared to my graduation from college, I was ranked pretty high. But the first year, as Karel said, it was horrible. Mine was brutal. I actually was studying next to this person every day. She ended up to be the valedictorian of the class. And I'm like, why am I on the bottom of the class? We sit next to each other all the time. When I say I was actually, first year, I landed somewhere in the top 30%. But I could never catch up to her. I don't understand that. I'm like, but we're sitting together, we're spotting issues together, we do everything together. And I don't know, maybe I just didn't know how to take an exam. And that was one of the issues I had. So the second year and the third year, I figured it out. And so it took me a longer time frame than normal, but I wouldn't despair just by knowing that you got grades that you didn't like, but you could always remember elder law is not just about grades. So it's about your experience, your entire package, your skill set. So that's one of the things that I would say, when we do hiring, we're hiring staff, I don't just solely look at their grades, because that doesn't indicate anything to me. What really indicates to me is whether or not that person is mature, whether the person has common sense. That's really important. Can the person stand on their feet? Does that person have compassion? All of that adds up to what we need to hire a good attorney in our office.
Okay, so thank you, Pauline. That was excellent. I would love to get to one more student question. Jean Estrada, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So I just want to ask, in applying to law school as student applicants, what type of things, such as internships, volunteer work, or your own participation in clubs or anything outside, help you distinguish yourself from the competition, being that we are going to be pitted against Ivy League and other high competition schools? What was your experiences in regards to that?
Did everyone hear the question? How did you distinguish yourself while in law school and as a CUNY graduate?
In law school? So in law school is again, keeping your eye on the ball, studying, doing everything you're supposed to, at the same time also looking out for internship opportunities. So that helps sets you apart. Joining any clinics that they have at law schools. Law schools always have opportunities outside of the classroom. There's always projects. There are always things going on. The first year of law school, I served on the SBA Student Body Association, which kind of dealt with all of the law school events and all of the budgets, and the whole thing was run like a Senate. The only, I probably would have enjoyed it much more had I had better time management, as Anthony mentioned, because time is everything. There is not enough time in the day. I was studying day and night. Weekends don't exist. I did take vacations. I had to, but I brought all of my books with me. I didn't do much when I was in the Caribbean, but I had the comfort of having the books with me. So it's definitely different for everyone. There's opportunities everywhere. You have to be a people person. You cannot be shy. You have to go to career events. You have to know how to walk up to people, shake their hand, introduce yourself. Opportunities are not going to come to you. I mean, that's just the bottom line. You have to go out there and you have to be confident and persistent because it's really the only way of making it in the legal field, unless, there are some people that are not as social, and they decide that the private sector is not for them, that they don't want to deal with clients directly. So they get, they work for the states. There's many different kind of opportunities. Like I said, I worked for the Department of Taxation and Finance Office of Counsel. So there was a lot of research. There was some hearings before the tax court, but you never actually worked, face to face with clients. So you kind of have to get a feel for things. Like I said, when I got into law school, I wasn't sure. I just kind of tried everything, and wherever it took me, I was happy with where I am now. So.
Excellent. So what I'm hearing is basically the same kind of things you should be doing as an undergrad, joining student clubs, doing internships, and taking advantage of opportunities is essentially what you would be doing as a law school student. Am I correct in summing that up?
100%. And just to add to that, the reason why I got into Albany Law School was because of the relationship I had with my pre-law advisor, who reminded me that getting into law school and being waitlisted does not mean you're getting in, that you have to go the extra mile, which is what I did. I emailed the dean at the admissions department. I scheduled for a meeting interview with her, and I explained to her why I wanted to go particularly to their law school. And 3 weeks later, I got a phone call telling me that I was taken off the wait list, and I got in. Had I not, followed my pre-law advisor's advice, maybe I would have went to Pace instead, Pace Law School. But again, I'm happy that I did, and the hard work never ends. I went there. I didn't know where it was going to get me, but I was willing to try anything. So that's kind of how you have to look at things.
Excellent advice. One last question that I saw in the chat. What is a bar association? So Anthony, I think you're probably one of the best people to answer that one.
Okay, well, the Bar Association are organizations primarily of lawyers, and we serve a lot of different functions. We provide continuing legal education to our members. We advocate for changes in the law and different policy issues that come up. And the third thing is the Bar Association is a tremendous place to network and interact with other lawyers. I have a distinct memory of this. When I first became a lawyer, I had this skeptical eye about what benefit I was going to get from the Bar Association. And I said, it's be a tremendous amount of time spent, et cetera. And quite frankly, here I am 30 years later, I have developed tremendous personal and professional relationships with other lawyers. And a lot of things with the cutting edge of things that are going on in the law in my field. And just as an aside, we mentioned, why is it important? I happen to be president of the Brooklyn Bar Association starting Monday. Last evening, Pauline, I think you were on the meeting that we had. The administrative judge advised me in that Zoom meeting we had last night that they're having a meeting next week about reopening the courthouse in Brooklyn. And she wanted us to have a group of attorneys put together to be involved in a meeting about some of the things that are going to go on with regard to the opening. And they wanted our input about certain things, safety issues and handling of cases, et cetera. So, that's what the Bar Association endeavors to do. And I'll be the first to admit, we're not perfect. We don't do it well all the time, but we try, and it's like any other organization. I've learned over the years we can't make every member happy at any one time, but we're trying to do the best we can for our members.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our program. I wanted to thank Kirill for meeting with me and organizing these amazing speakers. Pauline, Brendan, Anthony, thank you so much. My colleague over at Hunter College, Elise Jaffe, would you like to say a few words as well?
Just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out and doing this for the students, and emphasize another message that you shared, right? Sort of the subtext of this is that even in the midst of this pandemic, we're all planning for tomorrow. We're all moving forward. We're all still a community. Thank you so much for welcoming us today.
Yeah, hang in there, everyone. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah, Elise, thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.